Hey everyone, Ben here from Stellar Work. In today's episode, we're talking with Chris Jones from the Silicon Valley Product Group about their idea of a product operating model, how AI affects the role of product managers, and the role of product management in agile transformations. I didn't want to do an awful long intro this time, so let's pick it up from here. Hey Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Nice to meet you, Benjamin.
One quick question. You have heard nothing about the podcast yet, and you already agreed to jump on an episode. I mean, from my point of view, this is so great. But honestly, I've asked Marty Kagan to jump on the podcast, and he referred me to you. Did he force you by any means?
No, I'm not doing this under duress. I'm happy to be participating. In general, we do say yes to a lot of these. You know, it's a lot about just generally supporting the community. And and the only reason Marty would have said no to you directly is that he's got a lot of them going on right now.
I know. But yeah. Just in case, just blink a couple of times if you need help.
Right. The special hostage signal. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. Well, for everyone listening out there who don't know anything about Marty Kagan, about you, Chris, or the Silicon Valley Product Group, can you give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Silicon Valley Product Group, it's very small, actually. There are about 6 partners in the practice. However, it has been around for quite a long time, over 20 years. It was founded by Marty Kagan, right around 2001 or so, 2002. And it basically, what we do is we help companies that are trying to get better aligned with modern product practice. It's something that we've been recently starting to refer to as the product operating model. It's a way of working inside of these companies that involves certain principles, that involves certain competencies, certain roles, kind of collaborating in various ways. Over the years, we've had different ways of talking about it. The content hasn't really changed that much, or the general principles behind it haven't changed that much. But we used to talk about it as this is sort of how the best companies work, as opposed to how the rest of them work. We really did notice, all of the partners, both in our operational careers and our careers doing consulting with, through Silicon Valley Product Management, that there was just this stark difference between the companies that can just routinely deliver very high quality product experiences that their customers love, and they can just continue to innovate that way. There were strong commonalities within those companies, and they were vastly different from the rest of the companies. So that's been our mission all along, is to help companies operate more the way that the best companies operate.
So whenever I'm stumbling across like a new SaaS company who's claiming that they're product-driven or product-centered company, is that what you mean?
Sometimes people call it that. I mean, obviously, the mileage is going to vary tremendously on how successfully companies are actually implementing these principles. But oftentimes, they will call it product-driven or product-led. We kind of avoid those terms, though, because it conjures up a power structure within the company that doesn't necessarily exist. It's like, oh, well, we were sales-led before and now we're product-led. Does that mean the VP of product is in charge, and before the VP of sales was in charge? That's not what it means. Product is one of these, unfortunately, very overloaded terms. So yes, it does involve product management. There's no question that is a very, very important competency at all levels in the product model, but it involves many, many other roles as well. So yes, I think those companies that are saying we're product-led are kind of in this direction, but that term is a little fraught. That term is a little dangerous.
I understand. So what would you be looking for when you're looking at a company and you're trying to make up your mind if that's like a product-driven company, or are they just selling it this way?
Yeah. We generally divide this into kind of 3 dimensions, and some of them are a bit more familiar than others, but each one of these dimensions has quite a bit of depth to it. Probably the one that's the most familiar is how a company actually builds. How, and by the way, we're not talking about tech companies, but we're talking about the tech enabled parts of what these companies do. So it's parts of the company that involve engineers, right? So this first dimension of the product operating model really has to do with how you build. What do your release cycles look like? How good are you at instrumenting and monitoring what actually goes out into the field? Can you do things like A/B testing? Can you do things like progressively rolling out and pulling back? Sometimes it involves some of these agile systems, but those aren't necessary to truly be agile in the way that we're talking about, which essentially means you have these very frequent small uncoupled releases. So that's one big dimension, probably the easiest one to talk about and the one that's kind of the most familiar to people. There's a whole body of work going on that one. The second one has to do with how the product teams that are working to kind of discover and deliver solutions, how do they go about solving problems? What is really the unit of work that goes on to those teams? And it really comes down to, are you putting work on those teams in the form of, I need you to build this, here's a feature to build, or here's a roadmap to execute on? Or are you actually putting problems onto those teams and empowering them to figure out what the best solution is? So for example, it takes way too long to onboard a new customer, from the point that they start with us to the point that they first get some value. We need to really shorten that time. And you put a team onto that problem, but you notice in what I've just said there, you've not specified anything about what it is that you're expecting them to build. They're going to figure out what it is to build. So that's the second dimension. It's kind of how we call it, this is the pithy way of saying it, is how do you solve problems? And then the third dimension really gets at, how do you decide which problems to solve? And this is much more at the leadership level, and it speaks to product strategy. Most companies, sort of the rest of the companies, operate by, they have a lot of stakeholders. Many of them have their own agendas, and they need stuff out of the product organization. So there's lots of projects and things like that are getting balanced. And even if we do get them articulated into the form of problems, we're serving a lot of these business stakeholders. And that's kind of how it looks like in the rest of the companies. The best companies really have some systems in place to create a coherent strategy. It's like, okay, of all of the things we could be working on, we're going to pick these, and this is how we're approaching it, and we're going to be ruthless about saying no to these other things. So I know that was a lot, but that's, when I look at a company, I'm going to approach it at all three of those levels: how they build, how they solve problems, how they decide which problems to solve. And that's pretty much how I'll assess if they're truly, a product-led company or a company that's following the product operating model.
That sounds very interesting, because I'm coming from a field where I'm working with companies who want to become more agile, and they're implementing these operating systems like Scrum or Kanban, which comes with roles and different perspectives on how work should work. And they're implementing a role called a product owner, right? And when I first started out with Scrum, I was like, yeah, product owner is this very empowered person who knows everything about the product, who's very close to the customer, who has a strategy with that product going on. And when I stumbled upon the teams in different companies, I found out that a product owner is not really owning the product in that sense, but they're still implementing these operating systems or these frameworks with the different roles, and they're just not helping. And if you read the literature behind it, it basically says what you're saying, but they're not implementing it. So what is missing at that point from your experience?
No, we've noticed that absolutely as well, and there's all the energy in the industry about these certifications and all of that sort of stuff, around, CSPO and all of that has contributed to exactly what you're talking about. Fundamentally, and so let's divide up what, there's the role, and then there's the label on the role. So, I think many of the agile frameworks, they initially had pretty good ideas of what the product owner was supposed to be, and they called it the product owner. And unfortunately, what's happened is product owner has really become much more about a process management person, right? These are the people who maybe they write the stories, maybe they manage the backlog. They've got some rituals that they're supposed to manage, and that's how you get the certification. All of a sudden people look at product owner and that's the job, right? It's kind of keeping the wheels moving on this particular agile team. When we talk about this competency, we speak to it much, much more broadly. And we usually use the label of product management or product manager. And it does include, if you're doing agile, it's going to include that stuff, the stuff that is typically associated with the product owner. But that's maybe 15% of the job, maybe 20% of the job. The rest of it is much, much bigger.
I was reading Inspired, and the book already really inspired me, because when I went through it, I was like, yeah, this is what we need. This is what we're looking for. But there's no product owner in it. It's always product management. It's more of a profession, a skill set, a art, than a role that you could like describe with those are your responsibilities, and that's basically it.
Yeah, yeah. The way we talk about it is, if you're going to have product owner, that is part of the role that a product manager plays. One of the real anti-patterns that we'll see is companies, they'll have two people. They'll have one that they call a product manager, and they have another one that they call the product owner. And those two will sort of pair up. And and roughly what's going on is the product manager is responsible for more of the customer facing things and the strategy and understanding the market. The product owner is really the one who's helping the direct connection to the engineers and, kind of doing the stories and all of that. And this is an anti-pattern for a number of reasons. First of all, it gets confusing as to really who's going to be making various calls. There's a lot of communication that has to happen, and the whole nature and when product management really works is when you've got somebody who can truly sit in both of those worlds. They really know what's going on in the technology, all the way down to what the backlog looks like right now. But they also really know what's going on with the customers in the market, and they're going to be making decisions on both sides, and the decisions that they make on one side are informed by what they know on the other side. And you just don't want to put that into two different people. So that's a quick anti-pattern that we'll spot. I'm not usually as worried if I see inside a company they don't have product managers, but they do have product owners. And those product owners may have broader responsibilities than just managing the Scrum process, for example. That can sometimes happen. I'll recommend, it's like, look, you should probably call these people product managers. They need to be aspiring to this higher level. It's going to help with your recruiting, because that's really what the job title is that that level of person is looking for.
I wouldn't call it a red flag either. To me, it's just when I'm looking at an organization and they have like a product manager, a chief product manager, a product owner, and a chief product owner, if they have like a consortium of roles going on, all feeling responsibility for the product, feeling responsible for it, then decisions are going to be made by this group of people, and they're going to align on something, and they make compromises, which are always bad for a product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think also when there's a whole constellation of different specific product roles, companies just spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, what's my job and what's your job and what's this other person's job? And really, a good product manager is very holistic. They're going to figure out what's required to get something done. And just fine slicing all of the roles can really, it just feeds a process, right? It's just creating more and more process that's not particularly helpful.
Yeah, I was I'm from time to time I'm writing on LinkedIn, and I'm writing small articles about my work and what I experience. And one article was about why product owner certifications are broken, are actually harmful. And I've never written any piece on which I got so many bad DMs, like my DMs were
Yeah.
filled.
Yeah.
And I was like, the point that I tried to make was, you're going to be taught about product ownership by someone who started, in most cases, started as a Scrum Master, got very good at it, got to the, let's say, Scrum Alliance or Scrum Org or whatever, got their training set up, and delivered good trainings on it, but not necessarily from a product management background.
Right.
They're coming from a project management, Scrum Master, coaches background, but not from a product management background. So when you attend those courses, you want to look out for product management techniques that you're going to learn, and not so much about like coaching process techniques that might also be helpful, but are not really what makes the difference in the product owner role.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree with everything that you just said, and we have written a number of articles ourselves that sound a lot like what you're describing, and there's a lot of controversy around those things, and I guess I can tell you, welcome to the party, on that. Actually, it seems to be an even worse problem in Europe than it is in the United States, and we have it a bit in the United States, but it seems to be more common in Europe. That's what we found with our customers. And it is because there has largely been a big industry that's grown up around that certification. And so a lot of people's livelihood is tied up in that. And, it's always painful when somebody hears that, their whole reason for existence, professionally is being challenged.
Sure.
And, I think I do try and leave some room. It's okay, look, yeah, we do have to have some process in some places in order to get things done and in order to, be able to communicate across a larger organization. The biggest problem happens when the process becomes the thing. When that is what I see my job as, is executing this process. I'm going to do it flawlessly. I was certified on how to do it. I know how to write good stories. I know how to, manage the backlog. I know how to run the demo event, all of that stuff. That's not the job, though. The job is to create value for your customers, whoever they happen to be. And if process is going to help you on that, great. You use it where you need to. But if you see your job as just executing against the process, you've lost the game. You're just not you're not paying attention to the thing that you need to be paying attention to. And I think that's a large part of what this whole, this real religion around, kind of the agile rituals and the certifications around it just push people further and further in that direction.
But at some point, I think also on this podcast, people are going to hear what you're saying, and they're going to hear like, okay, so we need to build a product-centered organization. And when they think of building an organization, they think in terms of processes, roles, responsibilities.
Yeah.
And what do you think of when you think of a product-led organization, and how is that different from that one?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we really do rally around this language of an operating model, because it helps us separate the principles from the process. For us, an operating model is not a process framework, right? It's not flowcharts that show this goes from here and this does this. It's much more at the level of the principles that we are going to operate under. You may plug some process in at various places to make it work, but really at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, are we adhering to these principles? So things like things like we are trying to empower the teams by giving them problems to solve as opposed to features to build. And furthermore, we're holding them accountable for how well they've achieved an outcome, as opposed to whether or not they made a date and got through all the P0 and P1 requirements on a roadmap. That's a principle. Another principle is just embracing rapid experimentation in order to figure out the right way to do something. Principles around focus, the number of big things that a company is taking on at any given point. So our operating model that we describe lives at that level. And we're always trying to, when we have engagements with our companies, if we're doing a training or a workshop or talking to the executives, or, we always bringing it back to that. And I'm always a little sort of cautionary to companies that always bring it back down to the process level. It's like, well, we're trying to implement scaled agile, and that's what we're doing. It's like, look, you see that this is actually completely opposite of these principles that we're trying to operate with here. I'm not saying all process is bad, right? I mean, you're going to need some process, but these principles are really your North Star.
But I think it's really hard to like build a company or an organization just by principles, right? At some point you have to boil it down to processes, or you have to try to describe how do you do things? How do we do things inside this company? Right. So at some point you have to look at those principles and draw conclusions from them, right? Sure,
so
absolutely. How do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, it's rare that you have a company that just is going to engineer that all from the start and say, okay, we're gonna build this all at once, like this. Usually, we're picking up companies at some point in their evolution and trying to help steer them in ways that get them more, related to those processes. So there's going to be things, for example, I've been talking about the principles. The other big part of the product model are the competencies inside. So what does the product manager role actually do? What does that mean? What does a product designer actually do? How do we actually, have those people in the mix? What do your engineers do? And specifically, what does a tech lead look like? What are the product leaders doing? And generally speaking, there will be some things that the company can point to that are more tangible than just processes. But one of our big principles that we talk about is that you scale with coaching and leadership. You don't scale with detailed process. So you're trying to create good connective fabric among the people in the company, especially between individual contributors and their managers, and then the managers and the leaders above them, to ensure that these principles are adhered to throughout. That you're living the right way. And a big part of this is about creating an environment where you can have teams that are truly empowered. They're ones that you are giving problems to and asking them to find a solution, not ones that you're giving a solution to and asking them to build it. That's the real goal of this whole thing.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of a company who did that sort of transition, coming from a, let's say, sales driven, or in my case, most of the time I see like project driven companies. Can you give us an example of a company who transitioned from that sort of field into a more product-centered company?
Yeah. So we cover a few of these. We recently came out with we've got a few books that SVPG has put out, and the one that really tries to detail the fundamentals of the product operating model is our latest one. And we actually do profile a number of companies in that book that have gone through transformations. I suppose one that might be relevant to your audience, especially in Europe, is Trainline, if you know that company. So it's for buying rail tickets. It was in the UK and continental Europe, and they were they're still in the midst of their transformation, but compared to where they originally came from, they've made a tremendous amount of progress. They were originally just a website that would aggregate, the various rail systems so that you could buy tickets there. And they tried to IPO. They had a failed IPO. They had a private equity come in and said, look, we think we can do something with this. They bought it, and they started by bringing in some new leaders who were much more versed in these models. So they brought in a new CEO and a CPO and a CTO to help with that transformation. And one of the reasons we know about this is the CPO is actually one of my partners at SVPG now. So somebody named John Moore. So he was one of the people behind this. And they did a number of things, including how they divided up teams cross-functionally, how they funded work. Instead of it being a project-based funding, they would fund teams and then commit to objectives that they would give to those teams. So very, very different way of thinking about the financing. They did a lot of product discovery. So they became extremely experimental. As teams were seeking solutions, they were using all manner of prototypes and experiments in order to validate and shape solutions, in many cases before they wrote a single line of code, kind of figuring out the right way for this thing to go. They did a lot of analysis on the opportunity for the company. So this gets to how you decide what problems to solve. Among other things, they realized that there was just a much broader way to have a much broader vision around what rail travel meant for people. It was, whereas prior it was just about, look, I need to go to this one place to buy tickets. They are now pursuing something that's much, much more holistic around helping you as you're traveling. What happens if a train is late and you need to switch? What happens if you need a refund? How do you tell how crowded a train is? How do you plan your vacation? All of that sort of stuff is, in their broader vision. So, and they re-IPO'd, and it was very, very successful. I'm not sure about the details of this, but I think at the time it was one of the most successful IPOs that the UK had ever had when they went out. And most of this is related to transforming to the product model.
There was one part of your story which really went into my mind because I recognized a pattern that I've seen before. You just mentioned a PE came in and became one of the shareholders of that company.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you're transitioning to a more product-centered organization and you're going for this approach, giving your teams problems to solve instead of tasks, you're going to end up with a huge variety in results, which you can't control, right? Because they're going to think of ways of doing stuff which you never thought of, right? So you would get
Mm-hmm.
like crazy results. And a typical shareholder structure where you have like the 65-year-old man having his shares for 30 years of that company, running things like he's always been running things, is very hard to make an argument into transitioning into a company that creates something new, that ventures out and
Yeah.
and really tries to thrive from the complexity that it creates
Right.
by just giving problems to solve. And once a PE or a VC comes in, you have that risk capital allocated to that company with the purpose of risking that capital in order to make the gains and then go and have their IPO.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's a bunch of things I could talk about there, but bottom line, I think the big thrust of what you just said speaks to one of the principles that we talk about, and that is that you do the product operating model because you're valuing innovation higher than you're valuing predictability. And it's not to say that predictability isn't important. We do need predictability, but we need to be able to turn the dial here in certain places. And if you just think through it, if you're looking for something that is 100% predictable, by definition, there is no innovation in there, right? That literally, that is the definition of it being predictable. So you want an operating model that creates some space for that. And you're right, the pre-existing powers that be are going to be resistant to that. And in many cases, it's not that they are resistant to doing it. It's sometimes they're just resistant to even understanding that there's any other way of doing it, right? It just is hard for them to get their heads around it. It's like, shouldn't it all be predictable? I mean, that's how we, maybe some of us think as a species. That's how it actually goes down. So you're right. And in some cases, it does require a change in financial structure in order to get the people at the top oriented around this. I don't think, however, that's required, right? I don't think you have to have a PE, private equity event in order to affect a change like this. It certainly helps because you can sweep out the top and put people in at the top who can do those sorts of changes. But, in many cases, there are leaders who maybe had this going and then their company grew and grew and grew and then kind of lost sight of it, but they've re-gotten the religion around it, and they want to put that in place. In some cases, a new leader is hired in, and they're going to start to affect some of that change. It does require, though, to truly do a transformation. It's not something that it can entirely be done from the ground up. You can't just say, we're going to train up a bunch of product managers and all this stuff is magically going to happen.
Yeah. And what would you train them in, right? I mean, what would the training content be like? Showing them how to write user stories, how to do different testing techniques.
So we do a lot of training at the team level, but I guess my point that I was making is that's not enough, right? You do have to have a real will and commitment at the top. Maybe the CEO doesn't come up with the transformation plan, but they need to be seen as a strong advocate for it, because in many cases, they're going to be the one that has to, for example, have the conversation with the head of sales that says, look, this is a little different now, or the head of finance, we're going to be funding our work and doing our accounting in a different way. So yeah, you do need that. But there is, and we probably should talk about, kind of what it looks like to train people in the model, as well. There is some bottoms up, but the top down is very important. I did want to also say one other thing. I think sometimes people hear about empowerment within the teams, and they actually over-apply the concept. They believe that, okay, so empowerment, I set up these teams, they're cross-functional, they're really good people, and I'm a good manager and I'm empowering them, so I'm just going to step back and entirely let them do their thing. That is not ever going to work around doing things in a totally non-coherent way. So that's not what this is about. The leaders are still putting a tremendous amount of context onto these teams. The leaders are deciding the problems that the teams are solving, right? Empowerment doesn't mean you get to work on what you want to work on. Empowerment means I'm going to give you a problem, and you, within this context, are going to find the best solution to that problem. And I'm not going away, right? I mean, I'm going to let you do that, but I'm very involved in this to ensure that it actually aligns to context. So that's a subtle point. And, when we talk about these old people who are in charge, that's a big part of, we have to get them over that, because they hear empowerment, they think 100% autonomy, and all they can imagine is chaos, and they're right to imagine chaos. So anyway, that was a long answer to a really good point that you were making.
Don't worry. Like, what would you do if you just joined a new company? Let's say a dinosaur old company, and they want to be product centered, and you're hired as a new product manager, so to say.
Yeah.
What would your first actions look like?
Am I a product manager, or am I a leader who actually has some agency to change things?
You're a product manager.
Okay. Well, that's tough, because if I'm you're saying my job here is I've come in as a new frontline product manager, and how can I influence to get the company to move more to the product model? That's what you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'd say that's pretty hard. I'm not, depending on the size of the company, I'm not sure how successful I'm going to be. I mean, I can be really charming and charismatic and all of that, but I mean, I'd have to convince a lot of people on this.
But companies are doing this. They're hiring product managers to be more product centered. They hire Scrum Master or Agile coaches to be more agile, right? That's a pattern that we've always seen. It
is. But the question is, how much of the overall operating model can I influence, as a lone product manager, within a team? So, there's certain things, if I were really looking to take a job at a company like this, and I were an individual contributor, I would probably do a little diligence on the company ahead of time to see how aligned are they with these sorts of principles. And if they're not aligned, are they interested in becoming aligned? Like, can I be part of affecting a transformation for them? If they don't have any awareness of this at all, and especially if it's a larger company, I think it's going to be a very frustrating job if I go into something like that.
Yeah.
So I know that sounds a little hopeless, but
I But I can totally relate with this. Like when I'm thinking of a previous job as an agile coach that I took at a German tech company, they asked me to, hey, make us agile. We're like 220 people in southern Germany, make us agile. And I'm also at the point where I'm doing lots of research before I enter such a job, because when I asked them, they were like, yeah, implement agile ways of working like Scrum, facilitate communities of practice, so on and so forth. And when I did my research, I found out that this company's shareholder is a bigger internet company in Germany who is planning an IPO. So what they want at the moment are good numbers, right? So what they don't want is any of their child companies investing big money in a transition that pays off after the IPO.
Later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was pinpointing that out. I was like, okay, so if we do a transition, it has to pay off before the IPO. Break even has to be before the IPO. And they were really puzzled that such things as cross-functional teams, facilitating a retrospective, becoming more product-centered, has something to do with faraway things like a shareholder structure, an IPO of a company we're related to, but it has, right?
Interesting. So why would that company be asking for that transformation? Like, what was driving them giving you that mandate in the first place?
Yeah, so they were experiencing within the IT of the company that the IT department never really understood what the product people wanted, and they were really, really slow. And management was unhappy with the speed that they were taking into account. And the next thing was that they were losing people. They are not a very attractive employer in Germany. They really have to fight for people to join the company. And they're also located in an area in Germany where it's really hard to get good people. You get some, but they have to move there because it's a very, very rural area, so to say.
Yeah.
So they want to have like this feel-good, agile thingy that's going on in some companies to attract new people and to deliver faster.
Got it. Okay, so speed, recruiting, and morale were the main reasons, and those are very good reasons. Let's take away this larger holding company issue for a second, because I mean that was an interesting observation that you made on that whole thing. I think there's a bigger problem here, and in the case that you just described, and it is the fact that they're hiring somebody at the individual contributor level to affect this change. This change, the type of change that you're talking about, would really. Were there product managers at all in the company already, or were you the first one?
There were like product owners, like gathering information, prioritizing it according to management visions, and then handing them over to the teams and explaining throughout the different sprints what the text meant in Jira.
And who did you report to in this scenario when you came
the CEO of the company?
Okay, but the product owners would they report to you?
No.
Were you empowered to do any restructuring of the organization?
So what we ended up doing was we did an assessment where we looked at the operating model of that company by going from where does the work come from to where does it being worked on, and where does the done work go to, and how do you get feedback from that?
Right.
And we were assessing that operating model, and then found out that there are customer connections missing, feedback loops missing, there are like handovers badly made. And throughout this assessment, we came up with a bunch of things that needed to change and sorted everything out that had a net positive impact, the change which had a net positive impact after the IPO. And we structured it that way. So we say like, those are some low-hanging fruits, get those, but also focus on this, because on the long run, you don't want to fall behind on this one here. Got it.
So you're in this scenario. You're consulting with them. You're not the product manager who was hired in the scenario you gave me.
No.
And I think the other thing, and maybe this was in your assessment, but it does sound like the core competencies really weren't in place. So a leadership structure around product management, maybe a leadership structure around product design. I don't know, but those would have been part of my assessment as well, because those things are critical. You can't just put in a few rituals and processes, on this. You have to have people that truly own this and truly understand this. And I would suspect, and again, you might have done all of these things in your assessment, but I would suspect that probably a large number of the actual individuals who were in that product ownership role were not going to be fit to be product managers, which is fine. There might have been other roles for them in the company, but it is when you start to define product management around what the product model really requires, oftentimes it's a very different just type of person to do that sort of work.
Digging a little bit deeper into the product manager role, I was very curious because I know this is a little bit of a jump in topics that we're doing here, but I have to ask this because everybody's talking about AI for a couple of years now, and it doesn't seem to go away anytime soon. So I would like to know, from your perspective or from your experience, what have you seen changes with the implementation and availability of large language models within the role of the product manager?
Yeah. I mean, this is the $1 million question now, right? I mean, I think everybody is trying to figure this one out. Not
give us
just
the
for
answer.
Product management, not just for product management, but for all sorts of roles. I don't know. So I'll start at kind of a high level here. I think there are, if I really think about it, there are kind of three different ways to bucket talking about this. The first one has to do with just the products that we create in the first place, right? And how much those are, that this generative AI is an enabling technology, right? It makes things feasible that weren't feasible before. So I'd say if you're a product manager, that's the most important thing to understand right now is, what does this mean for your product? Or, how do you know the technology well enough to really have ideas on how this is going to impact your market and your product? And there's a tremendous amount of stuff going on out there right now, and a lot of it is just overhyped, and it's so that we can say generative AI and have that be a line item on a sales sheet. And that's kind of the second thing. I think, well, so for the first thing, sort of the genuine enabling technology and the opportunities, I think that is real. I think we're still figuring it out. I think there are a few use cases out there that have really started to hit. I'm not sure the true killer app, use case has been discovered yet, but there's no question there is a lot of utility, coming from this, and it means very different things in different industries. So, we can talk about that. The second is the hype, and the fact that everything that's getting funded these days, is you have to have AI in your pitch, better even if it's in your name, right? And that sort of thing just annoys me because it's performative. It's not genuine. You're just doing, it's like, how can I connect the dots between my product or my idea and AI? Oh, I know, I'll do this. And, you write it down, and investors love that.
We have a small group of people like talking about tech once in a while, and we already have that joke, that running gag that goes on, that Mark Zuckerberg renames the company Meta into AI,
right.
Just going with the next wave.
Yeah, exactly. I think AR is AR and VR is one that is kind of fizzling. I mean, I don't think it didn't have as much hype as it didn't. I mean, the one before that was blockchain, right? And the tech doesn't go away. There are real enabling use cases, but the marketing fades, on these things as people as the reality sets in as to where is the utility going to be. I think with generative AI, it is much more broadly applicable than those other two. So I think there are going to be some real things, but the hype is going to come down. Yeah. In some ways, I think it already is starting to come down a little bit. And then the third area is, if you're a product manager anywhere, how are these generative AI tools going to help you do your job? And lots of things there, both high and low. There was I think if you subscribe to the Lenny's newsletter or listen to his
I do.
podcast,
That is an awesome newsletter. That
it's
is an
fantastic.
awesome
It's
podcast.
fantastic, and
Go check it out, everyone listening.
yeah,
That's really good.
exactly. I mean, it's kind of required content these days if you're in product management. But he did a really interesting write up on that third category of just sort of the tools and where they exist and what parts of the job are going to be the most impacted. And I don't remember the details, but there was one really interesting insight that came from it. So most of us think about the more tactical things, helping us write better, reviewing things, kind of cleaning things up. And yes, there's a lot there, all the co-pilot, types of things that are going on, both in coding and, just information generally. But the thing that I thought was interesting was that he thinks that this can actually be helpful for things like strategy, coming up with an overall strategy. If you can get a prompt right, it's not that it's going to turn the key and it's going to give you the strategy, but it may give you some early scaffolding, on how you can begin to think about things. And, I'll say just with some of my experiences with it, I have found it helpful to kind of kick my thinking off in a certain direction when I've just got that blank piece of paper in front of me. So yeah, those are sort of the three dimensions here and kind of how I generally think about it.
So what I've seen from my experience are only good things. I really have to say, even if you don't implement AI within your product or service, just the part of creation and using AI on the creation part, let's say the GitHub Copilot thing, which has been out since 2022, I guess.
Before ChatGPT.
Yeah. Which is really, really good. They published this study that a average developer would increase in performance by 20% by using it. It's crazy. It's really good.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking at a product owner role, things that I've seen is that they use this within Jira or whatever ticketing system they're using to create roadmaps, forecasts, do all the project management related stuff, which they shouldn't be doing as product owners or project but they're still doing it. And AI is helping them to get rid of that quickly and then focus on what's really important and what really matters.
Yeah, that's
which is not counting story points.
Right. That's actually a really good observation. I mean, what we find, this was before all the Gen AI stuff, is that many people who were technically in a product management role really treated it much more like a project management role and doing all of that stuff that that has to be done, of course, and usually is quite urgent, but it takes away from the ability to do the real product management work, which mostly consists of product discovery. So prototyping, testing, conversations, collaborating, all of that sort of stuff. And when you're buried in the project management work, you can't do that true product management work. And one of the remedies that we would talk about there is actually a different role. It's kind of, we call it delivery management, but it's really what program or project management becomes in this empowered team model. We don't like to use those terms because they sort of conjure up a lot of process and stuff. So we've sort of redefined the role a little bit. But your observation here that Gen AI can help with some of this too, because those are exactly the sorts of tasks that it's good at. So yeah, I like that.
All right. We're slowly coming to an end. And thanking you very, very much for jumping on today's session. Next up, I'm going to interview. I'm still having to decide on it, but I have like 3 candidates in terms of the topic of strategy, product strategy. What would you say is an interesting question that I should bring to the next session related to product strategy, and maybe also in the face of all the AI hype? What would you say?
Yeah, boy. Let's see. A question to ask somebody around product strategy. Well, so do you know who is going to be on that you would be asking?
Oh, I don't want to name drop since I'm not sure which one of the 3 is going to make it.
Yeah. So one of the big things we really talk about, actually, Yeah, okay. Here's something. So one of the things we talk
Mm-hmm.
about in strategy is the notion of thinking in bets, placing
Mm-hmm.
bets, and how you go about doing that, within a product strategy, so that just realizing that not everything is going to work out. So how do you organize things in such a way that you can place bets and ultimately get a good outcome, even if it's not exactly this particular, precise, predictable thing.
All
So
right.
how about that?
That is a good question. I'm
Good.
already
Yeah.
curious what the answer to that would be.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. Now you got me hooked. So I'll listen on that podcast.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. To anyone listening and to everyone who came that far in the podcast, if you want to check out the books mentioned in the podcast, I will provide a link below. Just click on the show notes and you can get them there. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining in.
I had a lot of
And
fun. Thanks for
yeah,
inviting me.
that wraps up another great episode of the Stellar Work podcast. A huge thanks to Chris Jones for sharing his expertise on the product operating model and product management in the age of AI. Chris, your perspective has added valuable layer to our understanding of how AI is transforming the product landscape. For those of you inspired by today's conversation, follow Chris' ongoing projects and insights, check out his LinkedIn, and also make sure to follow the Silicon Valley Product Group. Remember to subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already, and feel free to drop us a line with your thoughts and questions. Join us next episode for more eye-opening discussions, and thank you, listeners. See you soon.